I texted a buddy of mine in the FBI and said, hey, can you get me this guy's mugshot? I was sitting at my office one day and somebody pulls up in a Jaguar S-Type. And he comes in and says that he is building a automotive country club of sorts in the Northeast Ohio area. I was like, okay, well, this is pretty interesting. And he shows me promotional videos and renderings, and it's got this fancy brochure, and says that he's building it in a couple towns over and wants to know whether or not I'd be interested in being involved. I said, okay, well, maybe, but obviously I want to tread carefully and want to do some due diligence on you, see what you're going to come up with. And I could be interested because it would be a unique cross-marketing opportunity. But I said, I'm not the guy that's going to give you $500,000 to build me a showroom there by any stretch of the imagination. But I'll kind of take a wait and see attitude, and we'll continue the conversation. Now, I don't mean to knock Jaguars, but an S-Type was, let's say this, is not the best Jaguar ever made. And it might be a decent car, but I would say most self-respecting car people would not desire to own one. And they certainly, especially this guy who claimed to have a 15-car collection and was trying to impress the most well-heeled collectors and automobile people in Northeast Ohio, would not lead with the Jaguar S-Type. So that was the red flag that got thrown up that made me look into this guy more carefully. So he started throwing out people he knew, and local mechanics and local builders, and this guy was a builder by trade, and he had built a local restaurant and had built this gorgeous log cabin in a very wealthy neighborhood, and claimed to have built it all cash, and said he knew this mechanic who was his best friend, and told me all this stuff. So as soon as he left, I started making some phone calls. Called my friend who was a local high-end mason and said, hey, do you know this guy? What about this house? He goes, oh yeah, that one. That was way overbuilt, and the guy was super leveraged, and it ended up getting foreclosed on and sat forever and never sold. And then I called the mechanic who he claimed was his best friend. I mean, that's believable since he had 15 British cars. But Earl said, yeah, I think I know the guy. I don't know. Maybe he's brought a car over here, but I'm not really sure. So I kept digging. I looked up local court records. I couldn't find anything under this guy's name. And it was Jeff Badger. It was Jeff. So I was like, okay, And then I started finding stuff from his construction company, Badger Brothers. There was all sorts of tax liens and all sorts of stuff. And then I found out that all the proceedings against him were under a different spelling of his name, Geoff. So then I started searching that, and I'm just getting friggin' rap sheet in all the local courts of not paying vendors and different civil lawsuits and things like that. I'm just, my goodness, this guy is a train wreck. So I started following him more and kind of kept him at arm's length. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So we would have lunch, and he'd update me on what he's doing. And he was one of these guys that would use every advantage possible to gain your trust. So he found out that I was a Christian. So of course he latched onto that. And man, he was a believer. He went to this church, yada, yada, yada. And, oh man, you should meet my daughter and you guys would get along. Like, this guy was pulling out every stop. As much as I don't respect people who put on a certain image, I also don't respect people who use their religion or ethnicity or some sort of cultural background or anything as a means to gain an advantage in business, right? Let your character and your business acumen speak for itself. And it really bothers me when Christians do that. They see that I'm a Christian, they try to use that to their advantage. And I'm like, no, we're going to do business because you do good business, not because you claim to be the same religion or whatever. So he said that he had already procured a property and was breaking ground on it. And then 6 months later, he said, "Oh yeah, we finally closed on a property." I'm like, "Well, I thought you already got one." "Oh, well, that one fell through." And so I'm following his social media and stuff, and he posted that they had gotten unanimous approval from the local planning commission to start breaking ground on this project. So I went and searched through the planning commission minutes of the meetings, and I went back and found his meeting, and it was complete denial. He'd gotten shut down. And this was on like his GoFundMe page. And the guy was trying to pre-sell memberships. And so he's going around to all the local car dealers and getting the salesman to essentially like sell to their customers because it was the same clientele. And he would kick back the salesman $1,000 for a $5,000 deposit. I'm like, well, that's shady. Like, number one, I'm not going to endorse you for money. I'm going to endorse you because you're a good product. And number two, I don't want to get paid until everything's all done. So just everything he was doing was shady. So then he picked a different town to do this in. And he was going all around to all the local car shows. And at one point, he had actually been loaned a GT3 by the local Porsche dealer to go display at this car show. And he had this banner that was made. And it was hilarious because he took a banner that he had made and he had a sponsor on it. But I think they had cut ties with him. So he put a different Porsche dealer as a sponsor. And you could tell he had just taped it on after he had printed it out. And so he said that he was aligned with Porsche of North Olmsted, a local dealership, Collection Auto Group. And I happened to know the owner. And I called him up and said, "Hey, just so you know, like, this guy is advertising on his website and everywhere that you guys are strategic partner sponsors." I said, "What's the real story?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, that guy came by and made his pitch." And I just said, "Well, when you have something actually built, call me and we'll take a look at it." And that was enough for him to say, "Yep, this dealership is my sponsor." So just everything was a complete exaggeration, if not a total lie. So then he ended up hiring a sales and marketing guy. And that guy came by my office and he was judging people by their cars again. He was driving this old, like, beat Trans Am. It looked like Dwight Schrute's Trans Am. And so as soon as he left, I Googled his name and found out that this guy was recently indicted for a multi-million-dollar scam through his investment company, mostly on like elderly and retirees. So I was like, oh my goodness. But there was 3 people with that guy's name locally. So I said, well, maybe it's not the same guy. And I texted a buddy of mine in the FBI and said, "Hey, can you get me this guy's mugshot?" Because all my sleuthing, I couldn't figure out if it was the same guy. And so he sent me back a picture of the guy's mugshot, and I'm like, that's him. So I didn't let him know that I knew all this stuff because I said, I'm just going to keep tracking him, keep letting him think that I trust him and all that, and just enjoy the ride. So he bought a Shriners building and had worked out a deal for, I guess the Shriners could still use the building. And it was a $750,000 purchase. And I'm going, where the heck did he come up with this money? And he had a grand opening party and had the Ferrari club there and all these different clubs. And I showed up for entertainment. I remember he had done some construction, so there was a little bit of progress. But there was this like 1934 Bentley in there. And their version of a display placard for this Bentley was literally one of those like industrial paper towel rolls that they just like ripped off a foot and written in marker, 1934 Bentley and the statistics on it. And they couldn't even spell the model name right. He kept going, phase 1 is complete. We're sold out for phase 1, taking deposits on phase 2, and just kept doing his thing. And I finally found out where he had gotten the money for the building. And it was a private capital company in, I think, Massachusetts. And they had given him $3 million bridge loan. And essentially it was to buy the property and do improvements. But it was a real short-term loan. I think it was 3 years. So he essentially had like $2.5 million to play with to build out the rest of this building. So I said, okay, well, maybe it is going to happen. Who knows? We'll keep watching. And I lost interest for a minute because there's no more juicy details. So a year or so later, I drove by the building because I hadn't heard anything about it recently. I had assumed he had completely gone belly up, and I thought, well, maybe I'll stop by the building and see if I can buy it, because if he put that 2 million bucks into the building, this might be a great option for my next project. And I was actually thinking of doing a similar idea, but where he was selling empty storage condos for, I think it was $100 a square foot before build out. I mean, it was an absolute ripoff. I was just going to do a storage plus type deal where I'd sell monthly storage and then have a social club attached to it. And I pull up, and the parking lot has craters in it, and the place looks like it hasn't changed a bit. And on the front door, there is a notice from the city of Broadview Heights essentially saying no entry, unsafe working conditions, and, condemning the building basically. And so then I went online and found some reviews, and I guess he had tried to turn it into an event venue before he'd even finished it. And there was reviews from people who had had their wedding there that said they could smell sewer, and there was like leaking, like running sewage in the building and stuff like that. So this guy was just a freaking complete disaster. So I assume at some point the capital company foreclosed on the building and tried to get their money back in some way, but he obviously made off with 2+ million bucks because he didn't spend it on the building. Again, I kind of lost track of it for a while and only started to look into it again recently. And finally, he has a bunch of civil cases coming against him for people who place deposits, some of them to the tune of 6 figures for build out on their car condominium. And he's had a couple of judgments against him, including punitive damages, which I'm sure the money's not there. I mean, you can get a judgment, but good luck collecting on it, especially when you don't have a ton of assets. And the weird irony of all this, it's come full circle, because the gentleman who he hired to be his sales rep went to jail for scamming the elderly, and rightly so. And he ended up totally changing his life and repenting while he was in prison. And he and I became friends. And now he's recently been released from prison and is starting to work again and trying to pay off his debts, while his employer is now having all the charges coming against him. So it's kind of had this weird full circle where the guy who claimed to be a Christian in order to scam people is now getting in trouble, and the guy who was a scammer ended up becoming a Christian and has turned his life around.